All right, week 7. It's kind of similar to last week, but we've got a couple sort of important announcements I'm going to tell you at the end. So, number one, the first thing you need to do this week is the lecture video for Chapter 7, the skeletal system. Now, this is a long chapter. It's a lot longer than the integumentary was. So I'm splitting this up into 2 parts. I know like on the videos, I always break them down into like 30-minute sections. But I'm going to have 2 different folders for this. So skeletal system part 1 is what you need to watch this week. That's going to be on like the functions of your skeletal system. We're going to look at the different types of bones that we have. We're going to look at the microscopic structure of your skeletal system. And then at the very end of that, we're going to start looking at the skull bones. That should sound familiar because we did those in lab last week. But that's just part 1 is all we're doing this week. All right. So you can find that, go to the Learning Materials tab, click on the folder for Chapter 7, Part 1, and you're just going to watch Part 1 this week. All right, once you've done that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the Learn Smart assignment because most of the questions on there are going to be on Part 1, on like the background information and the microscopic structures and things like that. So you can go ahead and do that. Remember, those are bonus points. Those will help out on your exam grade for the lecture exam. So that's due October 13th. That's when your next lecture exam is. You have a axial skeleton lab video to watch. So just like last week when I had the skull models and I showed you what the structures were and all the bones and bone markings on the skull, I did the same thing for the axial skeleton. So we're going to look at the vertebrae. That's the big majority, is just the vertebrae. And then after that, we're going to look at the sacrum. We're going to look at the ribs and the sternum. So I believe that's it for this one. It's not as long, the video. I split it into 2 parts, but the whole thing is like an hour. So it's a little shorter than the skull was. Watch that because you have a test next week on that material, all right? So do not put that off. I know I said first thing would probably be the lecture video, but you might actually want to watch the lab video first, just so you've got more time to study and prepare. All right, so we'll talk about the test in just a little bit. The only other thing you have due this week is the Connect assignment. Number 4 is going to be on the vertebrae and the thoracic skeleton. So it'll match up exactly with what we did in the lab video. All right. Okay, so I know we all know we had the first lab test a couple weeks ago. That was on body organization, and then you had to know the tissues. So what we're going to do for the second lab exam, and that is next Monday and Tuesday. So it's going to be October 5th and 6th. It's going to be really similar. You are going to have images. They're going to be very, very similar to the labeled bone images that you have in Blackboard. All right, so the PowerPoints that I've made with the videos, it's going to be really similar to that. They won't be labeled though, it'll just be the picture, and then I'll have a number on a certain bone, or I might have like an arrow pointing to a certain bone, and I'm going to ask you to name that bone. So for example, forehead, if there's a sticker right here on the forehead of the skull, it would say, number 1, name this bone. And because it's a lab test, you're going to have to know the name and you're going to have to type the name out. All right, so frontal would be the name of that one. And then there could be a follow-up question. You might have like a certain bone marking. So for the frontal bone, there's a little dot right above your eye socket, a little hole or passageway. There might be an arrow pointed to that, and it would say, name this bone marking. And you would type in supraorbital foramen. All right, side note, if those names are terrifying you and you're like, I've never seen those before, go back, watch the videos. You still got a week. That's the good news, but you should be doing this when they're assigned. But you'll need to know all the bones and bone markings for the skull and axial skeleton, all right? If this sounds overwhelming, number 1, I promise you can do this. Just put in the work, put in the time, study, and you can get this. But remember, the way that this class is usually taught, like up until maybe a year or so ago, you had one bone test, and it covered all of the bones of the skull and the vertebrae and the axial skeleton. And then it also included the arms and leg bones. What we're doing is we're splitting that in half. So this test is only going to be on the skull, vertebrae, and then the rest of the axial skeleton, all right? So that's Monday and Tuesday. And you can see on there, I know hopefully you've been doing this all along, but if you'll click on the lab tab over to the left, go to the lab exam 2 material. At the top of that folder is where you've got your list of bones and bone markings. So that's like it's really your study guide. It's just a list of the bones and bone markings to make sure that you know how to identify each of those. And then underneath that, there's a couple folders with all the lab videos that I've been posting. And then underneath that, I had a student make a review PowerPoint a couple years ago. So it's the exact same lab images that are in Blackboard, but the names are covered up. So what you would do is open that up in a PowerPoint, and then every time you click, it's going to take away one of the covered up names. It's going to show you what the right answer was. So that is that is an absolute great way to quiz yourself and make sure you know this material before the test. All right. Okay, last thing, and I'm going to make a separate announcement for this really shortly. You probably have seen it by the time you watch this video. Your lab kit assignments, I know I haven't really brought those up that much because I was waiting, because I know at the beginning of the semester it can take a while to get those in. But remember, in the syllabus, and I sent an announcement way back even before the beginning of the semester, you have to have a lab kit for this class, all right? So those first assignments are going to be due October 18th. That's about a month, about 4 weeks from now. All right. So number one, if you have not bought your lab kit, you really have to do that. You cannot wait any longer. It can take a couple weeks for those kits to come in. So if you haven't ordered it yet, you're kind of behind. You want to get the kit in, and you want to have enough time to get familiar with it and do those labs. All right. So go to the lab kit activities tab over to the left. It's right below the Connect assignments. If you didn't watch it yet, I've got a video that explains how we're going to do the lab kit assignments. But there's a couple things. There's a safety agreement that you have to sign, and like by sign, you type in your name and submit that to me, and there's instructions on how to do that. And then there are a list of the first 2 lab assignments are going to be due October 18th. I know that sounds like a ways off, but I would go ahead and do those, all right? The first lab assignments we have are based on the first chapters that we did. So that chapter 2, 3, and 4, like super lecture, where we covered chemistry and the cell and diffusion and osmosis and all that. It's going to cover that material, all right? So go ahead and start working on that. Any free time you have, go ahead and start working on those assignments. And if you run into any issues, let me know. The instructions are really straightforward, and on some of the trickier parts, they even have videos embedded where you can click and watch, and it'll kind of show you what to do, all right? So that's it. Be looking for that other announcement about the lab kit assignments. But if you have any questions, let me know, and go ahead and start studying for that lab exam because it's coming up soon. All right.